Hi, I'm Wendy from Shiny Happy World, and today I'm going to show you just a couple of tricks for when you're sewing rows of quilt blocks together. So I'm assuming that you've already joined some of your blocks into rows and now you're going to put those rows together, and I'm going to show you some ways to make the seam intersections less bulky and go together really neatly. This is a block that I've almost completely put together. I've joined the first two rows, and what I'm going to show you is how to join the third row. But I want to talk about what happens on the back of the block. I tell you in the instructions to press the seams going in opposite directions, and I wanted to show you what that means and why we're doing that. So what I've done is I've pressed these two seam allowances where I've joined these three blocks together to this side, and on this row I've taken those two seams and I've pressed them to this side so that they oppose each other. And now I'm going to show you how to put the next one together so that you'll see how that works. So now this row is all, the seams are all going to the right, and this row that we're getting ready to add to it, the seam allowances are all pressed to the left. So what happens when we put them together is that these seam allowances tend to nest together, and you can actually kind of slide this block over until it bumps up against the bump of the seam allowance there, and they really lock together nicely. So you want to slide them together until they lock together, and then I use 2 pins holding each seam allowance down. So I do 1 pin on this side and another pin on the other side of the seam so that both of my seam allowances are pinned down. I'm going to do that one more time with this other seam. So I pick it up and I push those seam allowances up against each other. And then I'm going to pin this side. And I'm going to pin this side. So these two rows now are ready to sew together. We'll take that over to the sewing machine. Before I start to sew, I want to show you something. Right now, this seam allowance is pushed up. Half of your seams, your rows, when you put them together, the seam allowance is going to be up, and half of them it's going to be down. When it's down, it's great because nothing's gonna, it's just going to tend to flow that way. When it's up, if you have a free arm machine like I have, where this can be separated, you're left with a little trough there. And when your seam allowance is pointed up, sometimes that seam allowance will grab onto that little trough and push its way down, which makes a lot of bulk and just can mess up your seams. So I'm going to show you a little trick for that. Take a piece of masking tape. Oops. And I just tape right over that. I make sure not to put the tape far enough back where it's going to interfere with the feed dogs. All I'm trying to do is cover up that little gap there. Now any of my seam allowances are going to flow smoothly over that. So now I'm going to go ahead and sew. So I line up the first corner, back stitch. And then I'm going to pull on this thread so it doesn't eat my corner. And one little trick that you want to do, as you come up here, I'll point to this with my pointer here. This is the point of where your triangle comes together. You can see where those two seams come together. If you want perfect points in your square, you want to make sure that your needle is going right along the top of that point. It's just a little thing to watch out for as you go over those intersections. And the next intersection doesn't have it, but I wanted to show you that on the one that we had. Make sure my end is lined up. And now, when we open that up, that bulk is distributed 2 ways on those seam allowances. So it helps you put it together and it helps to distribute the bulk so you don't get 2 knobby lumps where your intersections are. So that's it. That's what I'm talking about in the instructions when I tell you to press your seams in opposite directions and nest them together when you're putting your rows together. It makes it a lot easier to put those blocks together and have those intersections be nice and neat. I'm Wendy from Shiny Happy World. I'll see you next time.